Season 1 of the Wheel of Time. An extremely mixed bag that I have quite a bit to say about. Now, I'll reiterate something I've been saying since pretty much the beginning, and that's that reviewing a whole season is a lot clearer than reviewing episode to episode, because now I get to see the full final picture of what they were crafting, whereas reviewing episode to episode often feels like, to me, reviewing chapters of a book. Let's go ahead and dive in deep to the various categories I got here. The first thing I want to talk about is the editing of this show. I know, the sexiest of topics, but editing to me is maybe the most important part of presenting your work to the audience. You can take something that's not directed super well, you can take something that's maybe a little bit shoddy in its lighting, and through editing, do a lot of work to fix the final product. And boy, oh boy, when this show took its time, some stuff was edited really great. I mean, the usage of the bolt cam in the episode 7 cold open, as a tech nerd, I want a bolt cam for book reviews so bad. But then there were other sequences edited so poorly, especially the end climax with Yosha Stradowski as Rand, Madeline Madden, and Shamael, who the performance of Shamael is pretty damn good. But the editing for this ending sequence, I've rewatched this episode 3 times now, and every time I get to this sequence, it is baffling to me how it is presented. It doesn't communicate what's going on with Rand very clearly. It doesn't communicate what's going on in the dream world versus reality very clearly. And the just whirling, spinning motion, it's dramatic, but it fails to communicate anything of substance. We do get some very interesting visuals and cool sequences, like the tracking shot of Barney as he's going through Winter's Night Slaughter. Fantastic. But there's just also so many poorly edited sequences, especially this cold open. It is what? Because in like the post process, you work on everything not in chronological order of what you shot it. You just work on the most important stuff and try to get it up there. And then as more shots come in, you're just working constantly. And the quality wavering within this show for editing is just doing this. Next up is structure. And this is where I start to feel really bad for the creatives involved with this show, because we know for sure the showrunner asked for 2 more full episodes. I assume mostly for character development, world building, and relationship work. And the lack of those 2 episodes, it's like desert. Every time we actually are given the moments of allowing the Mansfield 5 to bond or display their character, I am drinking them in like a 5th grader who is not hydrated all day at the water fountain. That is the weirdest metaphor I've ever chosen, because they're performed pretty darn well by the actors. We're gonna get into the characters a little bit later. I really still like the casting almost entirely, but they are given so few moments to actually develop the characters these actors have spent so much time trying to understand. Marcus Rutherford and Madeline Madden especially, I feel like I was given almost no time to watch them become Egwene and Perrin, which is a damn shame, because their performances deserve better than that. I don't have too much more to say about structure, except for it all just feels far too rushed. Episode 1 should have been 2 episodes. I used to think, yeah, Winter's Night should have been the end of episode 1, but no. It is a good way to hook an audience, but a better way to hook an audience is to establish characters they care about. And we did not get that until far too late in the season. Next up is communication, an area where the show did shine and falter. First and foremost, the communication of lore and magic didn't really exist much here. I have talked to people who have not read the books about their impressions of the lore of the world and the magic, and while I admit the show is quite intelligently weaving in small elements here and there to get people informed on what's going on, overall, new viewers are just not super aware of what's going on in the show on like the broader sense. To be fair, most Wheel of Time book readers are not sure of what exactly is going on by the end of the Eye of the World. That's totally a justifiable thing to say. Robert Jordan's admitted the Eye of the World's a bit of a mess and he didn't actually have the full lore solidified in his head at that point. But for adapting the show, it's your job to polish that up and try and make it fit the end vision for the series. And there were some really good choices made to actually try and accomplish that. In concept, I actually like the ending with Rand quite a bit. Having this parallel, without getting into spoilers, to some elements from the ending of the actual series, and having the main reason he doesn't agree to what's being proposed is he respects the agency of the woman he loves, that's great. And it feels super true to the characters. And it's undercut by contradictions. This show is full of accidental contradictions and just, what? Moments. My favorite example upon multiple rewatches is the time communication in the last episode. It makes zero sense. So in the twilight hours, Moiraine and Rand walk off to go into the Blight. Fast forward a little bit, and we're having these women who can channel come out to have some form of contribution to the battle. Despite it still going on over at that wall, they don't go there to help at all, and they just stand there and wait until it's literally nighttime. And also, in this time frame, we see Rand fall asleep in the Blight. Why? Oh, so we can get a dream sequence where you do a fake out death of Moiraine? Cool. Like, we have Moiraine at one point being like, you have to keep your strength up. I get that. Sleeping in the Blight is not a good choice to do that. And she even tells him, like, don't touch anything. And then he's laying on the ground, and then he sits on a log. Don't touch any... What? I wouldn't put a spotlight on this stuff if the show wasn't putting a spotlight on this stuff. Now, I'll admit, I really did like the scene that happened in the dream between Rand and Ishamael, where Ishamael feels like he's just playing with Rand. He sucks an arrow into his eye. Oh my God, cool concept. Visual needed more time in post, but cool concept. And I will actually say one other choice I do like here upon my rewatch of the first season. Initially, I was angry that we're not getting mad at Ishamael, because I think he had so much personality to book one. But he also adds a lot of confusion, and I can see with how much they're already struggling to communicate so much of what Jordan did, having a character do these mad ramblings might not be the best idea for people. And the fact that the performance is strong enough, I prefer the guy from the book, but I get why we didn't get mad at Ishamael here. Though, dear God, we needed some dream sequences where he was talking with everyone, and I assume if we had gotten 2 extra episodes, you might have had that instead of just random scary face pop out. I never liked that. And then yes, we have these women who are just standing out there. Night comes, and we'll get into that more later. Now we're gonna get into the first category where I'm actually like mostly positive, and that's going to be characters and acting, despite the characters not being developed enough. Nearly every single time these actors were allowed to shine, it worked. And I liked the chemistry between them. It felt like they were up together. The melodrama was presented just as melodramatic as it was in the books. I'm still not a fan of having this weirdly hinted at romance between a Perrin and a Egwene that then is undercut and is said not to be real, but the Black Wind was manipulating Perrin through that fear, so maybe it is real for him. Falls into the communication issue again. But I think these people are becoming these characters. And even the ones I didn't feel like meshed super well, like Rosamund Pike at first, I was like, that's not how I really got Moiraine in my head. By the end of it, I was like, this isn't the Moiraine I had in my head. But it's a very interesting interpretation of Moiraine. She's more driven, a little more evil feeling, and I just like that from her. And I think it goes pretty much without saying, Daniel Henney slaughtered it as Lan. He gets the physicality down brilliantly. His performance is strong, and yeah, I would say he's a bit more emotional than he comes across in the books, but I don't think that much more so, but it's enough to make with you connect with him more. I didn't want him to be like some Wolverine badass who's just always hard. He's someone who feels very human. I see people still complaining about the funeral scene. He's acting as a designated mourner. I recommend you look into that. To me, it actually fits into him fulfilling duty. He's the duty heavier than a mountain guy, so I get him doing it. But if you don't like it, that's fine. You can not like that scene. I actually do think that chest stuff was a bit much, but I actually think it's a pretty good premise for him, but that's just completely subjective interpretation stuff. And I actually think the show made the proper decision from a creative standpoint to get away from certain elements from the book that would inhibit character and acting. For example, the Aes Sedai stoicism is a very big deal in the book, and at first I was kind of outraged as a fan, being like, why are we not seeing the Aes Sedai being super stoic? And then I realized that having people trying to act stoic the whole time doesn't really come across super great, and it's better to let your actors act, because as actors they can never live up to how you had Aes Sedai serenity in your head, and it'll probably just end up disappointing and confusing. So instead of having Aes Sedai gasp and guffaw at each other, just gave them more personality. I think it's an element from the book I love, and I wouldn't change in the book, but I get why it's dropped for the show, a much more visual medium. And I saw a ton of people outraged that the Aes Sedai didn't have their veil on while they were killing. Again, I think half the reason that scene really worked was the emotion on the actor's face, and if you take away that, it wouldn't be nearly as effective. And she was actively giving birth, so I'm not super worried about like, put that up. She has a human coming out right there. And yeah, some people are gonna go, the Aiel would still do it. And I'll go, maybe in the book, but canonically this character isn't like born. We'll get it, that's spoilers, another time. So the biggest praise I have for the show is this category, and it's so strong I can even point at the horrendous costuming of Loyal, which I stand by, just, nope, redesign him for season 2, pretend this didn't happen, that's bad. But the performance of Ahmed is so strong that I still love his version of Loyal, despite having none of the eyebrows or ears going on. That guy is Loyal. Now the final major category I want to talk about here is plot. And this is where I have to really start talking about COVID and Barney dropping out, because I have a theory we did not get the ending they wanted to deliver at all. Partially because of this sequence with the women channeling in the battle. It feels like they could not return to location, hence why they're not in the city or on the wall, and they're just in front of a green screen doing their best, because even the acting from the actors feels far more disassociated from their surroundings than we've seen before. This shot of them just walking in from the side, what? It feels like an actor was off screen on a green screen and just, okay. And then there's huge foundational elements to the plot where Perrin feels like at this climax, he was supposed to be somewhere else. Maybe he was supposed to be our connection out of the wall where he's actually out there and ends up running away with some people. I am not sure. Maybe the Aes Sedai were originally supposed to go out there. What we do know is because of COVID, they couldn't get a bunch of Trolloc actors back they wanted, and getting to certain locations was now impossible. They had to move whole locations. So I have issues with the story all the way from beginning episode 1 up to the end, but as a critic, I can't help but try and wonder, what was the original plan? What is reshoots? What's just editing stuff to try and make it build towards other things? This is actually something that the more I've watched this season, the more it's become abundantly clear. This is not the original story, in my opinion, we were supposed to get in the broad strokes of the narrative, because they didn't have certain locations, they couldn't get a bunch of actors in, and to me, it feels like a lot of the strange editing, a lot of the weird narrative beats, especially as the show goes on, are them trying to adjust to get characters to different locations and different things they weren't originally supposed to. And I would just love to be a fly on the wall in the writer's room when they were trying to get all this stuff to work and figure out where it goes. And again, totally reaching here, but I think that might explain a lot of the weird editing that they had to crunch as well. Shooting in the dark, perhaps, but that's how it feels to me. The absence of Barney himself is extremely well justified, especially knowing that he's just last minute was just gone. And like, I hope the guy's okay, no idea what happened to him, but he's out. And it feels amazingly cohesive that he's gone. Granted, I didn't like the Matt stuff we got in the ways, but yeah, it's justified for his character at least, so cool. And there's no way it wasn't supposed to be Matt and Fane having a showdown at the end, because Perrin hadn't spoken to Fane yet this season. Pretty rudimentary rule of writing. If you're gonna have two people have like a showdown at the end that people need to be tense for, establish a relationship between them on screen, not just hinted at off, because all we get before this is just Perrin going, was that part on thing? Was that? Did you guys see part on? That's part on. Which feels to me like they're just desperately trying to put in anything they can to have Perrin be connected to Fane to have this ending make sense. And also, just having Perrin be there, he's struggling with the Way of the Leaf, but his struggle with the Way of the Leaf has nothing to do with him in this sequence. And the way he's removed from the room is jarring and strange. And then the whole, like, it was last minute writing. It just really felt like last minute writing to me. Which, yes, affects the end review of this season. I'm actually gonna end this by talking about one more praise and one more criticism. I'm realizing in editing I didn't get around to, sorry. But I do want to criticize heavily, now even after I've rewatched it and seen a bunch of discourse around it, the scene where Egwene appears to heal Nynaeve from death. My phone is falling. I don't want to re-emphasize things I've already said in episode reviews, which I've already covered a lot of those, and I'll cover more spoilery things in future videos that are me spoilers for the full series, but I would be remiss if I did not bring up the horrific revival, it seems, of Nynaeve in the final episode, because spoilers for the series, but not really, death is not something that should ever be able to be casually healed by the One Power. It's just not. And so I don't believe that is what they are showing us here in the show. I don't think Nynaeve is supposed to be dead. I think because of shooting problems, they just didn't have a cohesive grasp on the time going by, and I assume maybe someone went, it'll be great if it looks like the sun's rising right now, even though the lighting here is completely different than the Blight, but I guess that's fine, because we see a tremendous amount of time must have passed where Nynaeve is unconscious with burnt out eyes. Your average layman who has not read the books is gonna go, she's dead, and then we see Egwene cry onto her, and she comes back as Egwene channels, which absolutely looks like a resurrection to me. Again, I don't think they're actually doing that, but it is just the prime, perfect example of how this show struggles in communication. They don't know, it seems, how to communicate the rules of the power in an efficient way for me. And that's why I actually like it in the books. Robert Jordan just exposition dumps this stuff repeatedly, and maybe you consider it clunky writing, but boy oh boy, by the time you finish Memory of Light, you know the rules of Wheel of Time. And this goes doubly for how they're communicating the dream world so far. The fact that Rand stabs himself and it's not clarified that he's in his own dream and not the real world and not the dream world is a big issue, because if he did that in the dream world, he would have just killed himself. And I hope they make that clear later. But okay, one last praise. My biggest fear going into season 1 wasn't actually realized, and that's that it would feel like a Game of Thrones ripoff, or they would have just adjusted the show to feel like Game of Thrones in a bunch of ways, but it really didn't. It did feel like a version of the Wheel of Time to me. It didn't try to be overly dark or gritty. Jordan does have gore in his books, he just doesn't focus on, and there was gore in this show that felt a bit beyond those in the books, but it wasn't hyper focused on or brought to the forefront in a way that is done for Game of Thrones, as it should, because that's the way A Song of Ice and Fire is written. It also didn't feel like every other fantasy show that Amazon Prime has put out. It did have its own distinct voice. That's a pretty big praise, actually, for me. I like that they did have the time to really bring in a few of the elements that make this feel Wheel of Time. It definitely doesn't feel like a Game of Thrones knockoff to me.
I actually want to extend that onto the use of humor and, again, the chemistry between the main cast as well. They really sold me on that. I laughed at times, and I really got emotionally invested in them to a surprising level with how little the structure allowed. Maybe that's because, I'm fully willing to admit, maybe that's because I'm such a big Wheel of Time fan and I knew the characters so much, but it fit.
And I cannot imagine the stress of trying to piecemeal together the season we got. But as a critic, I must acknowledge it is messy, there are inconsistencies, and if you adapt Jordan materials properly, you could easily hit an 8, 9, 10 out of 10 season 1. They just obviously had hurdles that prevented them from doing that. And I don't know if from the beginning base premise, it was something that was inevitably going to be done. But yeah, this was a season I'm disappointed in. I'm hopeful for season 2. I'm feeling about the same of season 1 of the Wheel of Time as I did for Witcher season 1. So I'm hoping they step up, because I do think season 2 of The Witcher is a bit of a step up from season 1. Full season review coming soon. And I'm hoping season 2 of The Wheel of Time also gets a step up, because maybe they won't be dealing with COVID and they won't have one of their main actors drop. But if I had one final message that I know the people involved with this show will listen to, and hopefully people at Amazon will listen, give them more episodes. I know your whole job is money, 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 make it cheap, make it as streamlined as we can. And I know there are a lot of people who did really like season 1. And great, good on you. Not as positive as you, I would say I'm but there is still potential here. You just gotta work for it. And that's going to come down to whether or not the studio is not, in my opinion, coming from an outside perspective, going to rush post-production and limit the amount of episodes they have to just 8 to tell what I think we've been hinted at. The next season is going to try and be books 2 and 3, which they are definitely less filled books in content versus book 1. So, okay, but oh my God, you need 10 episodes. Please. Anyway, that's just my final thoughts on season 1 of The Wheel of Time. I'm definitely in love with The Wheel of Time still as a book series. I think the first season could be something we look back on as an unfortunate start to something that becomes great. please. But for now, that didn't roll down like it was supposed to. That was bad. That was just this goblin's opinion. Anyway, everybody, like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.